Alrighty, welcome back, folks. Welcome back to 2025 and our first call back for the Spark THL7AU Patient Summary FHIR IG project. I did want to start with an acknowledgement of country, and we acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands on which we all gather today. For me, that's the Turrbal and Yagara peoples. And we pay our respects to elders past, present, and emerging, and extend our respects to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. We acknowledge the First Peoples as the first scientists, educators, and healers. I wanted to just run through our agenda for today. And sorry, I think I'm losing my voice, so I'm going to take a few frequent sips of water. We'll kick off with the usual business, which we always do, go through approval of minutes, look at actions, updates, news, and then we want to do the... Sorry, I think someone needs to go on mute. Nicole? Go through the outcomes from the scoping session that we did. There was the workshop in December to identify the set of priorities for Patient Summary R1. And I'll also do a quick report back on what AU cores, on the outcomes from the AU core R2 scoping workshop, which was held the next day, and what's relevant to us. And we'll do a report back on the December Connectathon, which had a set of activities around some initial patient summary test scenarios looking at IPS. Sorry, someone really needs to go on mute. And then we'll finish with getting some of the updates on what's next around CFG, look at our next meeting and any homework over the fortnight. I did want to draw your attention to, we had sort of forecast that the draft Patient Summary FHIR IG, we could walk through that today, but that's not going to be available yet. So we're going to need to postpone that one to the next meeting. So I think that's 7th of February is our next meeting. So we'll bring that there, which will reflect the outcomes from the patient summary scoping workshop. Is there anything else that needs to go on the agenda today that anybody wants to talk about? Right, let's move on to usual business. So we've got 2 sets of minutes to approve. So this one is our second call that we had from the patient summary call, which is the 29th of November. These minutes were sent out some time ago, and all the feedback has been incorporated. So I'm just going to do that scroll through. So we have all the necessary parts here on agenda and minutes and the recording and what decisions we did. This, for those of you, just to remind you, is the meeting we ran through the consumer user journeys and made some decisions about ranking our order of priority for these and which ones we wanted to work on in R1. So does anybody need more time to review these minutes before we look to approve them? I'm hearing none. So would anybody like to motion approval of the minutes from the 29th of November?
Marvin, I'm happy to motion.
I'll second.
Thanks, Marvin. Sorry, was that someone seconding?
Yeah, I'll second. Josh.
Okay, thanks, Josh. Right, so Marvin has motioned, Josh has seconded, and I'll now bring up our poll, which I have stopped sharing because that's... I'm hitting the wrong button today. Okay, and I'll just launch that for approval of the minutes. Please vote for affirmative, negative, or abstain. If you didn't attend the meeting, absolutely click abstain. Also, if you're on a call and you don't have the option to select one of these buttons, you can just say your name and say what your vote is, and we'll add that to the tally. So we've got about 70% of participants have voted now, so just waiting for a few more. right, I'm going to count down. Sorry, Marvin.
Affirmative.
Okay, thanks, Marvin. So I'll end that poll in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, and I'll share those results. So including Marvin, there are 17 affirmative, 0 negative, and 11 abstain. So that motion passes and those minutes are approved. And so we'll now look at the next set. So these set are the ones from our scoping workshop. So this is made up really of 2 pages. So we have the minutes. Now, this wasn't recorded because this was a face-to-face workshop. So the minutes are fairly extensive. And thanks very much to Jamie and all the others who contributed to that, including the people who were there on the day who have gone through review and added in some feedback. And we have the slides. We've also got the write-up from all the worksheets that were done on the day from the different tables is here. And these minutes have been circulated for review a couple of weeks ago, I think. So does anybody want more time to look at these before we move to approve them? All right, hearing none, who would like to motion for approval of this set of minutes?
Marvin, I'm happy to motion.
Thanks, Marvin. And who's happy to second?
I'll second.
Okay,
Heath.
thanks, Heath. I'll bring back that poll. Okay, so you should now see a poll for approval of minutes, and this is for the December scoping workshop. If you weren't there, please select abstain. And again, if you are unable to vote, you can say your name and what your vote would be.
Marvin, affirmative.
Thank you, Mum. Okay, so I'm going to count that down now from 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. I'll end that poll and I'll share the results. So we have, including Marvin, 15 have voted affirmative, 0 negative, 15 abstain. The motion passes, the minutes are approved. All right, back to approval of minutes. So in this case today, there are no actions. There are no actions recorded out of the previous sets of minutes, so we don't have any to report on. In terms of updates, there's actually 2 that I wanted to let you know. One is that AU Base 500 has been published. I think that was published last week. So that's out and available for anybody who's interested in the latest release of Base. And also that we have a new co-chair joining at the AU Core TDG, which is Ricardo, who's joining us from the Australian Digital Health Agency. And that was confirmed in the AU Core TDG call yesterday. So that's great. And Ricardo will be joining us and probably chairing some of these meetings, which I appreciate. Thanks, Ricardo.
Problem. Thank you.
Welcome.
Okay, a reminder. So there's a face-to-face coming up in February. So that's there's a CDG TDG day. So there's 19th and 20th of February in Adelaide. If you've registered with Spark, you should have got an email saying, hey, this is coming. Here's how you can get tickets. If you haven't got that and you want to come to the day, there's an event, there's a QR code on the screen at the bottom right now that will take you there to get tickets. So this is where we're going to do another workshop on how we're going to support the AU Core R2 and Patient Summary R1 requirements in FHIR. And we're going to talk a little bit about those in the report back that I'm going to do. If you have any questions about this, you can email sparked@csiro.au. I'll just actually drop that in the chat. So if you've got any questions about this event, you can just email to that and we'll get back to you. Okay, so I wanted to move on to the patient summary scoping workshop. And just a little recap. So what we'd been doing over the previous calls, because there'd been a couple of calls prior to the face-to-face workshop, is looking at what will patient summary involve and what are priorities. Things like use cases, and having a number of calls to look at consumer journeys and technical use cases. And then we wanted to work through data priorities and features and then get into test scenarios. And so a lot of that was the focus of last year to come into this year so that we can then start to work through that and take that forwards. Just going to probably skip over this bit, but I want to draw people's attention to the project team checklist on the right. So even if you aren't new and this isn't your first call, can you just make sure that you have gone through and you are you've got your right accounts to sign up to HL7, you're connected to chat.fire.org, because this is where we'll be doing the feedback. Now that we're into the design work, we'll be posting like announcements on feedback and how you can actually provide those comments or vote on things. And it's going to be through Confluence, through Jira, and through Zulip. And you're going to need those accounts so that you can engage and put your feedback in and participate. So just want to remind everybody that that's really important. Okay, so recap. Here's the summary of decisions of what we'd got to before we did the workshop. So we had discussed and made a decision that the Australian Patient Summary is going to be compliant with both IPS and with AU Corp. And that we were going to target, yes, delivering in FHIR R4, that it would be the new versions of IPS, AU Core and AU Base, and that part of the work that we would do as we developed is drive any changes or improvements into IPS, into AU Core, and into AU Base as we went along in our project. We've gone through and looked at consumer journeys and identified the 3 that are most relevant that we want to work on in R1, being the emergency hospital attendance, the interstate GP visit, and referral to specialist and allied health. And we also looked at the associated technical use cases and said, yes, those 3 are relevant and they're what we want to work on. And really, these 2 go together to form the use case. So that's where we got to and what we were taking into the scoping workshop to then start to look at data priorities and features. So the workshop day, which was a whole day and in Adelaide, was to discuss those technical use cases and consumer journeys and understand the data priorities that had come out of the clinical design group and work through those for what we wanted to deliver and what we thought we could deliver in an R1 space. And also start to look and explore some of the features and what might be involved and what might we need to do. So on the day itself, we had Jai Dacey from the Department of Health and Aged Care, who provided a government perspective. The Australian Digital Health Agency also provided their perspective on adoption and implementation of Patient Summary. And then we had a number of the presentations from industry partners who either are implementing Patient Summary now or are also looking to do that and have a relevant capability either exposed internationally or that's something that we're exploring in the Australian space. And we went through a series of workshops. So workshops looking at our priority focus for features, our priority data scope around sections and resource usage, looking at how we would start a draft patient summary FHIR IG, which I'll just call out next fortnight. We're going to look at that. And also start to go through a little bit in the nitty-gritty of what does it mean to try to have those features in play in R1. I've just dropped that one there. So that's just the minutes, which we already have linked to, of the day. They're quite detailed. So if you weren't there and you are interested, it's absolutely well worth a look, especially to see, I think, some of the slides from the agency and some of the slides from the industry partners on where they're going and what some of the priorities and challenges are. So what we started the day with was looking at identifying use case features. So at each of the tables, there were 5 tables. There was a consumer journey and technical use case there, and people were asked to consider what would be needed, or what are the priorities that should be included in Patient Summary FHIR IG. And then those were collated and reported back. And then we put up a list of those to individual attendees to then rank in priority order so that we could come to some decisions as a room. I don't think I'm going to go through this in great detail because we'll see some of the outcomes through the mentees that I'll just put up. But there was a great deal of interest around the ability to share and how we can share and how we can access, how we can retrieve, which is still going into sharing, how to make sure that people can actually see it, which is still, again, going into sharing. It's all that foundational kind of aspect. And I think there were a lot of really good discussions in the room around some of the capabilities, both at a local level and also maybe at a national infrastructure level, that might be necessary to connect all of this together. I'm just going to move on to this bit. So here's where we landed on the day. So the highest priorities to set as foundational features were generation, view, and retrieve latest. I've got the definitions there for generation and view. That was discussed in the room about how, when we said the word generation, what did we mean? And it boiled down to having the capability in a system to actually have a patient summary, basically. And then exploring what would that mean in order to actually have a patient summary. How do you create it? Is it machine generated? What are the other aspects that might be necessary, or kind of the next steps we need to look at? What comes under generation? And in view, that's pretty simple, that there's an expectation that a patient, and I know I've put the words patient here, though that's not the only actor that was looked at viewing this. In fact, the majority of the use cases that were presented on the day are actually, I think, clinician viewing. There are some that both a patient and a clinician can view the same patient summary, and there are some that it was expected to really be a clinician only who was viewing that content. But in the end, it all came down to, well, they're actually able to view it and understand it. I think retrieve latest is where it gets most interesting. And I think there's still a lot of space here, and we'll need to work through what do we mean by latest? Latest what? Latest where? Across my system, across like a HIE, across the capability to do things federated or not. And I think there was a lot of really good discussion in the room around that. For those people who were there on the day, are there any other comments or things that you want to draw this group's attention to before I move on from this summary out of I guess, why these were prioritised, and I think important points for us to take forwards.
Danielle, if I may just add one comment about latest, where you have latest / most clinically relevant. I had sort of say something during the workshop, and noting that most clinically relevant might not necessarily be the latest. I think that's something that we need to keep in mind as well. Thank you.
Thanks, Stephen. Would anybody else like to make a comment?
I'm fascinated that people are more interested in having them written than having them read, because if generation is more important than viewing, it's sort of interesting. People want to write them for others to read, but don't necessarily want to read them written by others.
I don't think this. So it doesn't represent clinical priorities or the priorities of, I guess, the human in the system. There are a set of things that really we're looking at. What other features we would need to be able to support, and I think is probably a lot more tangible to consider. What would I have to do in my system in order to make something available? And I think you probably start thinking generation. So I think that's probably where that came from.
Yeah, I agree. This is the implementation or the standardization priorities. So what do we need to standardize first? So we actually were surprised. I was surprised that view even got up there. So
All right, I might pop on to the next point then. We'll be talking about these as we go through, because these are kind of our starting point for where do we want to focus and go forwards. So we'll have plenty of discussion. Okay, so that's our decision that was made and was agreed that they are the top two was what was ended up discussed, because thoughts around retrieve latest was like, well, that is relating to generation. That's also relating to viewing. That if we focus as supporting generation and viewing and then unpack what those things are, that this will give us the necessary focus as we go through. So then we went to the next workshop was looking at data scoping. So there were a whole set of activities that were done where we went through the priority sections and then resources for patient summary. So what was presented was the clinical design group's presentation of priorities that had come out of the workshop. I think a couple of months ago, there was a face-to-face run with the CDG to identify that. That was presented, and then we also went through the worksheet of what else would be needed. What is the priority that we need to focus on supporting in R1? Doesn't mean it'll be the only thing. And then we broke down from each of those sections to look at, well, what then do we support underneath? What are there's a resource selection question, I guess, on how do we expect to be able to generate, view, share this information. So this is what this looked like. So across the tables, and this is a table report. So there are 5 tables. So there was, I guess, unanimous agreement that problems list, allergy intolerances, and medications were what absolutely had to be part of the priority for R1. And immunisations also came in at strong support with 3. Then there was, I guess, 1 table interested in history of procedures, 1 in history of, forgive my spelling, history of pregnancy. There was history of past problems, and there were no votes for diagnostic results or other sections. So we took the decision in that meeting that the priority sections that we will start supporting in R1 and focus on is the problems list, allergy intolerances, medication summary, and immunisations. And I think I have a diagram about, this is how they relate. So I wanted to bring this to the group here. So
in that table, does problem list imply current problem, given that history is also listed there, or does it perhaps cover both?
It implies current, but it's more about relevance, I think. So if there's not any hard rules around that. And I think that's been a topic that's also been looked at in the clinical space around what does it mean that we've got problem diagnosis up here and
Because
then
if you-
also past history here.
If you only provide a box for problems, people will put the current and past problems into it if they're relevant.
Yes. So one of the things that is important to take away here is this is about focusing our work, and it does not mean that people cannot supply this information. All these sections are defined in IPS, and additional sections that aren't even in IPS can be shared when this content is shared. What we're getting to an agreement of when we say, oh, it's these 4 sections, is that we will focus our discussions with starting here as the top priorities to have our interoperability discussions and standardization in Australia to make sure that we come to a really clear position on what does it mean to share this information. And then I guess we'll incrementally move through those we might get to some more in R1, or they might be in R2 and R3, kind of also taking that CDG approach of starting with a focus and then continuing to expand on that. Which I'll point out means that we will also need to have a position on R1 about that. Like, what does it mean for someone to share a patient summary document that has additional content? What guidance, where are we going to land on that? That's one of the things that we will have to have a set of, I think, workshops on and material about that. So I guess if we look at this diagram on the CDGs set overall of priorities being when they were ranked in prioritisation order, include the set that we're going to be able to target in R1 initially, and also had available in order pregnancy, past history of illness and procedure completed. It's also worth noting there that diagnostic results were considered relevant, but didn't make it into like the official CDG set of priority scope. It was passed to the TDG to say, look, that's, I guess, in your wheelhouse about prioritisation. So there's some nice alignment there where the highest priority items from the CDG are the ones that we have also agreed are the highest priority for us to focus our implementation and interoperability efforts on. Before I move on, is there anything else that people on the day wanted to comment on in relation to that? All right. Let's pop on to, I'm going to run through these pretty quickly. This was then looking at the resource selection available in IPS. So framing that, we have a possible set of resources defined by IPS that when you exchange problems list information, you can exchange that using condition and or document reference. And we went through that and had a look at agreements, and the room agreed that condition, that's the resource that wanted to be supported. We have no interest in support for document reference in R1. Which is the same decision really in allergy and tolerance, in the allergies and intolerances section, that out of resource selection, the allergy and tolerance resource is the one that we are going to focus support on in R1. Medications. This is a little bit more interesting. There was across the tables agreement on medication statement, again, all 5, and then there were 4 tables that wanted medication request, and 1 table had not selected that. We went through a discussion on this and have landed on both medication statement and medication request to be supported in R1, which lines up relatively well also with the other international standards around international patient access and IPS itself, which indicates support for that. And then in immunisation section, we also landed on the immunisation resource, to nobody's surprise. Are there any comments or any, I guess, insights people want to make or any questions about where that's landed for resource selection for support?
I'll just make one comment, which is regards to the existing data we have about patients' medications. Often the dispense information is the most accurate and available because people's non-electronic medication information becomes electronic at the pharmacist, and then the PBS captures a lot of it. So it's interesting that that would sort of be more difficult to include or focused on less at this stage.
I think in terms of translating that information, so medication statement can provide a summary of both, well, actually of all the below. It can provide a summary of a dispense resource, medication request, or medication administration. So I would expect that that might be how that surfaces.
The systems that we're looking at, though, don't have access to that dispensing information.
Not in the majority of the use cases, no, that were put up. Brett?
Yeah, I was just going to add, I think we would be talking about a set of statements that are curated or at least managed by the system to be current, you know. So I think there's and I think that depends on the system as well, because I think a hospital system is a bit different than an aged care system, it's different than a GP system. So they all have different availability of the medication record. You know, so I think, yeah, I think the idea is that this would be a relevant and current set of medications would you include in the summary. So I think that's probably the harder question to answer. Yep.
And that's something we're going to need to explore. What does it mean to actually support and share medications information? So I guess that will be interesting. Ruben?
Yeah, just on that statement about not necessarily having access to this dispense information, I just wanted to flag that in most jurisdictions now, most healthcare services have access to RTPM systems, which are based on the National Data Exchange and do provide at least the monitored medicines dispensed to an individual readily available via APIs.
All right, let's move on. And we can have these discussions, I think, in more detail when we actually focus on and do some of the workshops around medications themselves in Patient Summary. And I'm going to take us now to where we did a bit of a deeper dive into the approach to being able to draft an IG. And we looked at three things in the room and made some, I guess, some initial agreements on guidelines for inclusion in AU Patient Summary R1. If you've been through the AU Core journey, you'll know that AU Core has these and what they look like. It's very similar for Patient Summary. We've also looked through some profile design principles and discussed how we could start and populate the Patient Summary IG with those principles. So I'm going to take us through that now. So this is the set of inclusion guidelines. I'm not going to go through these in detail. I'm just going to say they're here. They let us guide the conversation. We'll refer back to them. They're on Confluence. If you have any feedback on them, you can post that also in Confluence. I'm just going to skip on for now because I think we've got more interesting things to discuss. Profile design principles. So we did a little bit of an activity where we explored, okay, we've got this statement that says we're going to be compliant to AU Core and we're going to be compliant to Patient Summary. Okay, but what does that mean? And there's these 3 points that we're initially defining, that what it will mean is that a FHIR resource, so if we take allergy intolerance, it shall validate against both IPS profile for that and the AU core profile. And there's some, therefore, order of precedence we looked at where the two have the same rules on terminology binding, which, oh, that's point 3. Sorry, I've skipped ahead. And that we shall validate reference elements against an Australian patient summary profile. So the idea being that we will define a patient summary profile. In and of itself is going to say, I am the rules of both IPS and the rules of AU core. So when you validate, you can validate against me. And then we looked at where there are, I guess, equal rules. And we said that the AU core value sets are preferred over IPS because AU core has that localization for Australia. So it's some of the things around medications, for example, or our immunization terminology, where that's kind of, we've got that set of terminology in Australia that needs to be used. So we went through and discussed and went through some examples on that. And we also discussed, let's start a draft AU Patient Summary FHIR IG, which will have a set of draft profiles. So do those draft AU Patient Summary profiles that represent this, that actually put in the compliance to IPS and AU core based on what we just agreed, like those particular ones, and then bring it back to this call to do a walkthrough. And that's what we're going to do in next fortnight's time. And I wanted to go through just in a little more detail, time we might, about what that means. So in terms of coverage of AU core, a little bit of a spoiler here, I guess, for the AU core R2 scoping workshop. At the moment, the projected scope of AU core will give us profiles for our bits that we have said are our focus. Sorry, so the orange circle is the focus. So we've said we're going to do the problem section, we're going to do allergy intolerances, we're going to, we're going to localize and have agreement on medication summary, we're going to localize and have agreement on immunization. That's where we're going to put our priority kind of attention first, is to go through these discussions. And we're going to have demographics. I mean, this stuff, document information, is required. And AU core either has in it now in R1 or will shortly the AU core profiles for all of this, except here. So at the moment, that's got a partially covered because there's not yet a definition or a plan to do a device profile that is an authoring device. I think that's something we might need to discuss if that's of relevance to us, that we really want that agreed, and then push that priority into AU core. There's been some interest in AU core in doing that, so it might happen anyway, but it's not currently on the plan for R2. So what? All right. Yes. Okay. So this is just another view of what's in AU core scope. So in R2, they've agreed to add medication statement and related person profiles. So there'll be an AU core medication statement and an AU core related person. They're relevant to us. We will use those in how we produce our patient summary profiles. And then there's some other things that, I don't know, they got discussed, they might be worked on, they might not be, like device. There is some interest in AU core in working on things like composition and document reference. They're sort of relevant to us. They might be worked on, they might not. So that's more of a, as we go through our journey, to keep an eye and monitor and kind of put our position on that. Okay, so here's what we would be covering with Australian localized positions. we will cover these bits of IPS so far. That's our priority bit that we've done, and that reflects what I was just saying about that we've already got a definition in IPS, we've already got a definition in AU Core, and we're going to do the work together to say, well, okay, yes, but what does it really mean? And do that over our next series of calls. And I think we'll also come to a position on device authoring, whether or not there is an AU Core profile in R1 based on how many people so far have been interested in it. And so that's what this kind of looks like at the moment. I think if we're using the colors for, like, blue is the document information, red being the required, yellow is, hang on, let me just remind myself. Yeah, required, recommended, optional. So they're the profiles we will establish in Patient Summary R1 and in our draft so far. And we've got these two down here that are actually brought in by reference. So they're brought in by reference from other profiles through AU Core. Does anybody want to go into that, what I mean by that now, or are you happy to leave it to when we do the walkthrough of the FHIR IG? Yeah, maybe let's leave that to when we go to when we actually walk through the IG on what this looks like and why. And I've got that generating system device up here as we might do something about that, or we might leave it as the unprofiled FHIR resource. We'll have to discuss what we want to do with that. And we also need to discuss, as we explore things around viewing and generation, if we make any decisions around guidance, if we actually translate those into formal definitions. So whether or not we have capability statements or actor definitions, we do operations, or there are some other kind of things like search parameters that, based on our workshops on how we're going to share this information, we may either stop at guidance in R1 and then explore what that's like when it gets implemented and come back and further that. Or we might feel confident enough in R1 to define a set of FHIR artifacts that actually put those in a machine processable way. But that's, as we go through, we'll need to work out where we want to land on it. All right, I'm going to move on to the next bit. So after all of that, in the afternoon, when everybody was tired, we thought, let's actually explore what view looks like. And so people were given basically a blank sheet of paper, a little bit, to say, all right, at your table, consider how patient summary should be viewed and why, looking at those use cases, and then come back and sort of talk about what are the important characteristics. And then we'd get people to rank those to kind of start the discussion of what's important. And here's what got reported back on aspects of viewing. And this was actually relatively consistent, I think, in terms of interest. It was about consistency and human readability. And I think we've got that call out there to being last updated, which I think is that ability to know that this is, like, visually know that. I'll translate that one. Aligned to a CSQHC. Is that, we might have the person on the line who submitted that. I think that's the Australian Commission for Safety Quality. And then there's a HC, is that correct? If anybody who was there on the day remembers that. No, we might have to track that down.
Yeah, I think Daniel, you're correct. It's the last HC means healthcare.
Okay. Safety Quality Commission. Okay. Health. Okay. Healthcare. Gotcha. I think there were some really interesting things about, yes, human readable, machine readable, the ability to do things like its provenance, I guess, looking at last updated, looking at the source of this thing, looking at the source of each of the entries, and being able to identify who the patient is and that it's actually in a safe format. And there was a whole bunch of discussion about what that might mean and how we might need to start talking about it, I guess. Which I guess that's just feeding into us, that we need to go through and have these discussions on how we're going to do that. All right, hang on, let me go to the prioritization. So then we put those and asked the room to rank them. And that's their ranking that came out of that. Would anybody like to comment on other insights relating to viewing or the discussions on the day? Or if anyone has any questions.
This could be solved by having things with very little machine processable content. So it looks like, HTML with a few bits of metadata would meet the expectations.
Any other comments or questions before we move on?
Just a quick response. I don't know that it's excluding computable content. It's just that in addition to that, it needs to be readable.
Daniel, one thing to add to this is that I had a number of conversations with participants at the workshops, and I made the comment. I mean, there were recommendation or high recommendations about the patient's ability, the data being available for patients to view. And I made a statement about viewability is not the equivalent of understandability. So we need to be a bit more careful about sort of what is presented for view, in particularly when we talk about putting patients in the driver's seat and whether or not what is being viewed is actually understandable to the patient. And if they are not, then what to do with that.
Okay, thanks, Stephen.
I just dropped out for a moment, so if anybody asked me to comment on anything, I wasn't here to hear it.
No, I think you're fine, Richard. Good. All right, I'll pop on to the next one. We'll be coming back to viewing, of course. So then we want to have a look. We wanted to have a look at generating. There was an initial worksheet that was put in front of people to kind of help drive that conversation and look at this across 3 different use cases these are the technical use case names, the patient-driven, the clinician-driven, and clinician-driven with the supplemental information. And to help the discussion, it was looking at some aspects of generation that are particularly relevant to us, of course, in our standards space. On whether or not it was relevant for whether or not the table considered that how and why it should be generated around systems on demand, and is that on demand through an automated operation like a dollar summary? Is that part of returning things like a document reference? Should it already exist as part of another user workflow, and instead of being generated on demand, it's actually just being referenced and retrieved? Would this be authored by the user? Could it be generated by the system and curated by the user? And then also looking at people to identify any other points that they wanted to do. Now, admittedly, we did not have a lot of time for this. So this was a little bit rushed, and really just to start the conversation. This is what we'll need to pick up in these calls and keep moving forwards. And kind of here's what was looked at and reported back, that all tables indicated generated by system on demand as relevant across the use cases. And there was one table that looked at document bundle returning a document reference, one looking at generated by system and curated by user. And then at the time, there was nothing below that. But I'm really going to qualify that I think we really ran out of time on the day. I think that's about right, Heath, to really get into this.
Yes.
Yeah, basically. It was a little rushed and to draw anything there, but we did have a couple of really interesting conversations that are in the minutes. But basically, we just went, look, this is about all we can get to. We'll go with those results, and then we'll take this forwards about what does it really mean to generate, what is really needed to go into a standard space. So
Yeah, I mean, there's just,
yeah.
You probably can't see it, Danielle, but there has been some discussion in the chat a bit about, what does this mean? Generation search, read only, all those sorts of things. And I guess my initial response to that was generate, but we may need to consider, what else is needed as part of this process over the next few weeks.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that's part of what will be looked at the workshops, is starting to drill into the use cases and the features and how we actually look at, I guess, meaningfully implementing those. And then what would that mean in the standard space as well? This is the difference between obviously a product implementation and what actually gets defined and validated in the standard.
Yep. What's standardized?
So overall now on where we've landed, so taking the first few decisions that were done before the workshop, we've, if we put all of these together, we've gone, look, a focus on making sure that you can generate and you can view is the highest priority. That problems list, allergies and tolerances, medication summary and immunizations is the highest priority for us to do the localization and sharing work. We've got the resource selection that we don't want to use document reference here in R1. What we want to use are the atomic resources, condition, allergy and tolerance, and medication statement, medication request, and immunization. We've got some agreement on some guidelines to keep referring to guide our decisions. What our initial profiles, so our profile design principles are that have elaborated a little bit on that point of being compliant to patient summary and core, and that we're going to start with drafting that patient summary FHIR IG and then bring that back to look at. So that's kind of where we've got to, which I just want to say a big thank you to everybody on the day who contributed to this, both coming into it in terms of preparation work and on the day for the really amazing kind of conversations. And I think we've been really productive so far. And that's going to give us like a really good starting point to take it forwards on, well, answering, I guess, what does that mean? Before I move on, are there any other comments or questions in particular about the R1 scoping workshop? All right. Let's move on. Very, very quick one for the AU core one that was held the next day. What came out of the R2 workshop is that AU core R2's focus is going to be essentially a maintenance release that's going to support e-requesting and patient summary with incremental enhancement of AU CDI coverage. At the moment, that's definitely medication use statement, and I think additional items will be picked up throughout that period of time, and enhancement of existing content. So as AU core gets implemented, as we talk about it and discuss what does it mean to be compliant to both of those things, except also within a specific lens of patient summary now, and have those feedback into AU Core. So there'll be a continuous kind of enhancement that will go on through the R2 process to take that feedback and work through it to refine what's there appropriately. Just got a couple of links to like the existing AU Core backlog. And if you have, I think something like that's more about like a parking lot idea about a bigger topic, then you can put something on this one. We might actually, so there's a parking lot kind of page where people can edit and add in a whole set of materials around something that for a set of considerations or future work that enables us to keep, I guess, a set of commentary on something that might not be relevant now, but is an idea that we don't want to lose. And so process-wise, we'll come back to this as they get raised. For us in a downstream IG, if we make a determination that we want something, like let's say we want a new profile, for example, we want AU Core to do one, or we want to make a change to something, we will discuss that in these calls, create a JIRA issue, and say that, you know, this is for us and why, and get it on the agenda of an AU Core TDG main call, and then attend that meeting and speak to it, basically. And if we do that, we'll also talk about in this call, like when is that meeting and who should go and represent that issue, so that we can get that kind of back and forth between them. Any kind of questions about that sort of just overall process or that AU Core R2 outcomes before I move on? Right, hopping on. I'd like to hand over to Heath to provide some of the report back on the Connectathon that was held in December. Did you want me to go to the next slide, Heath?
Yes, please. Okay, so basically the Connectathon in December, it was basically the following day or the following afternoon, after the AU Core meeting that we had in the morning. We started off the Connectathon, the AU Core track. So there was really two streams of work in that AU Core track, one which was around still testing at the AU Core implementation guide, and there was another stream around patient summary, in particular around the IPS, just for those vendors that had some interest in that. So in summary, the outcome of that exploration was that MediRecords had developed a facade to bring along to the Connectathon, and they demonstrated the ability to generate an IPS from their MediRecords FHIR API. This was then viewed in an IPS viewer, so that kind of gave some of the attendees a bit of an understanding of what IPS viewers currently are doing out there that are open source. It was also validated against the Sparked server. We had a draft patient summary as implementation guide, very, very draft, as in specifically for this task or the Connectathon. It won't be used as part of the process. And it was also uploaded to that server. So that was a nice demonstration. Best practice also had an IPS being generated out of their system. Alcidian also had an IPS being generated out that, and I got a copy of that and started validating that against the FHIR server, the HL7 Australia FHIR server as well. So that was So there really, in summary, there was 3 vendors that were able to come along and show some implementation around IPS as a good starting point towards an Australian version of that. We also had some discussion around the table, how we might actually use AU Core in the context of IPS, and having some patient summary profiles of AU Core, such as an AUPS patient, etc., and what the implications of using some extensions around that on how to define this merger of IPS profiles and AU Core profiles, and there's a couple of things there on impose profile and complies with, and the advantages of both of those. That was more of a, just an initial here is what we're thinking, what's the feedback, and there was no real outcome of that particular conversation as such, other than this is what we're thinking. So that was pretty much a nutshell of that Connectathon. Is there any questions or other contributions to their experience?
There is a
for those
question
that
in
were
the
there?
chat, whether for the Alcidian, if that's Firely, but
Yeah,
Firely with
sorry,
a E.
that is correct.
Okay. So yes, Ruben, that's the one.
Good to know. I just wanted to check I hadn't missed a server out there.
Fair enough. All right, so that was kind of setting us up and exploring some of the initial ideas, and I think validated the selection, or I guess, hang on, how do I put that? That the priority sections in the content that had been talked about and looking at generating and looking at viewing were, I think, quite validated on that day about who was there and where were they up to and what was the focus for them. So that was really interesting to get that. And I think some of the conversations around the IG will also surface again as we go through our next few calls. All right, let's pop on then to say, okay, so that's last year, basically. That's last year. And what's next in terms of moving forward? So we're still working through now a whole set of items. We've started some work. We've got around consumer journeys and use cases and profiles and IGs. And I just want to focus us on, I guess, the forward looking now. And so I'll hand over to Kylene to kind of give the update and a bit of that forward focus from the clinical focus group.
Thanks, Danielle. Just a quick update. Our first meeting for January 2025 is Wednesday, the 5th of February, in that our priorities is really further out developing the clinical scenarios and the data that comes off that to help support the AU patient summary consumer journeys. We'll be focusing on the 3 patient summary consumer journeys that really align with the technical use cases that the patient summary group project identified as of interest. So the interstate GP visit, the emergency hospital attendance and referral to specialist, and the allied health one. And we'll continue to support the Patient Summary FHIR IG project as needed. Just a quick update. We did put the Patient Summary consumer journeys online for feedback. These were the ones that were presented to this group as well as the CDG. We did receive 7 responses. It closed last week. We are aware that it was over Christmas, so it is a bit difficult and may have got lost in people's inboxes. We have kept it open until the end of today. So if you still have some burning feedback that you'd like to provide to us, please feel free to go to the website. If you really have questions or anything outside of that, please feel free to email us at sparked@csiro.au. Also, if you have any ideas for additional consumer journeys that are of interest, we do have a backlog of them. So if you want to let us know, you can email us at any time and we'll add it to the backlog. And as relevant use cases come up, we can have a look at that and consider those that are on our backlog. I think that's all I wanted to add for that. Oh, and just a plug for the AUCDI Release 2 patient summary. Feedback of that closes in a week. So if you haven't yet put in feedback and would like to, please get in there now on the Spark website. I think that's all I wanted to add, Danielle.
Could you drop a link in the chat to where the consumer journeys are available, I guess,
Yep,
so people
yep.
can go to those.
Yes, we'll do. Thanks, Danielle.
Awesome. And is there, you mentioned like there's a backlog of consumer journeys of interest. Is that visible to anyone?
Not yet. We're planning to put them up on the website where the consumer journeys are. We're also going to put up the query questions, the questions that have been identified as of interest, not necessarily for us to answer or for anyone within these groups to answer, but they're the questions that have come up through the development of these consumer journeys. So we'll also put those on the website. They should come up in the next couple of weeks, not too long.
All right, thanks, Kylie. Are there any other questions or comments from people online? All right, let's move on to the next bit. Okay, so I'm just I guess putting up this diagram to say, in the context of Patient Summary FHIR IG, so this is kind of like our timeframes now. Now from 2025, we've looked at the initial kind of proposal, the initial scoping of where we want to go, and we're now here in January to start going through the development, and the calls from now onwards will all be design calls and design workshops as we work through what that looks like. And the target for us is doing a ballot for comment in August, with going to ballot for working standard in, I think, March next year, which would mean that we end up publishing on there. Yes, it is publishing at the end of that kind of financial year. So 2026 June is where we would be. We'll start having a draft from, well, next week, basically, is where we'll have that draft that we're going to start doing walkthroughs and further discussions on, and go from there. There's obviously a Connectathon series that we're going to target for coming together and doing those, going through test scenarios and test data and exploring what that really looks like for those who are either already have implemented or are actively implementing or could implement, including inviting, I guess, different segments of the community, like maybe app developers, to come along to that. I'll just go, there is still one in March in Sydney. I don't think the official comms have come out yet from HL7 AU on that, but that is, I think we should see that soon. But there is one in March, and that is, I think, really our first opportunity for testing out both the draft patient summary and any of those further things that we come to around viewing and generating and what would be necessary in order to actually support the sharing of this. So I just want to kind of frame that's what we're looking at overall in terms of timings. In terms of upcoming meetings, so our next call is the 7th in February. And then there's the TDG day on the 20th that I was talking about, face-to-face in Adelaide. That's where we're actually going to do some of the workshops to go through content, and probably talk about things like the medications that we were just talking about, and also start to explore the features and aspects of the use cases. There's just talk about that March Connectathon. That's across 18th to 20th of March. I think obviously the official comms from HL7AU will provide that advice on when and where and how. And then our next online call is going to be the 4th of February. So that's kind of what that's shaping up for our next set of activities. What I wanted to do then is talk about our next meeting. So in terms of our next meeting, besides usual business and updates, I wanted to discuss a bit more about the March HL7AU Connectathon and the workroom symposium that will be happening on the day, for how we want to have a a session there or anything, any activities that we want to do in the Connectathon, or any kind of breakout ideas that we want to hold to engage with the community at that point. So I'd like to put that topic on there for our next call. So please have a think about that. We can now walk through, I think at that point, the draft Patient Summary FHIR IG, and then get into more detail on how we're going to address the use cases. And I think really more in reference to what are our topics and activities and preparation and who will be involved for that TDG day in Adelaide. Is there anything else that people think that we need to be discussing in our next call that I've not listed there? If there is, you can reach out to me via email if you want. You can also reach out to me on Zulip on chat.fire.org to say, hey, I think something should be on the agenda. I'm going to ask that question at the end of every meeting that we have, at the end of the call, just to make sure that we are including in, I think, some of the topics, especially with people who are trying to implement Patient Summary now, to make sure that this is aligned with the activities that are happening in the community. The last bit I wanted to talk about there is engagement points over the next fortnight. So there's a few active ways that if you have the availability and capacity to put in your feedback and contribute to shaping this content, that'll be happening over the next fortnight. So we've got the last on the consumer journeys. That's a today thing. So if you haven't already and you have any questions, any suggestions for clarity of wording, anything that you think maybe needs to be added, whether that's a new consumer journey or you think maybe a particular step needs to be further considered, please provide those comments. And then we will get back, I think, an updated set of consumer journeys for us to look at, and also the responses to any of those comments. There is also, as Kylie said, the AU CDI Patient Summary component is out for review now. So this is something we want to look through around how those data groups and concepts are shaped. And if we have any clarifying questions or any feedback, again, similar to the consumer journeys, if you think something's in there and shouldn't be, if you think something isn't in there that should be, please have a look at that and put your feedback in. And then lastly, I want to draw your attention to the fact that there'll be some new AU core profiles. So there's AU core related person and there's AU core medication statement. So that work is being done through the AU core TDG main calls that are on Thursdays. But what's going to come out to the community is a design proposal. So there'll be like an IG branch with the proposed profile itself with like must support and obligation and any terminology rules and any guidance, and also around any particular capabilities like search parameters will be there. And there'll also be, again, a way to provide feedback. So there'll be a Confluence page in which you can, if you're interested, go through and read those, consider what it would, whether or not they're applicable, and if anything for Patient Summary just doesn't work. If you think there's something in there that you don't think should be from a Patient Summary perspective, please put your input into that. And while the design calls will happen on the Thursday, you can also come into those and provide your vote and your voice in the meeting and ask questions if you want to. How this will be announced is on chat.fire.org, on the Patient Summary or on the AU core announcements. There will be a link to the proposals for these designs and where you can provide feedback. So if you're on chat.fire.org, you will see the announcement of these two coming out, and you are absolutely encouraged to get involved and have a look at those, because we will need to comply to them. Are there any questions about, I guess, over the next fortnight, those 3 potential feedback points, which are all, I guess, offline? And so you can go away and look at those and then put your feedback in through the various pages. All right. I think that might have been everything that I wanted to run through today. So I'll make a call for last comments, questions, or if there's anything that people particularly wanted to go through now. And if not, we could end the meeting a little bit early. All right, I'm not hearing that from anyone. So I'll call a close to the meeting. And I'll see you in a fortnight. So on the 7th, where we can talk through how we want to take some of the workshop activities forwards, and also have a look at the draft IG that is the result of our current set of decisions, basically, and start to go through that. All right, thanks everyone for your time, and I'll see you then.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mhm.